about how to get your team start thinking about risk management and how to make sure that your project stays on track without taking too many risks. I'm Nikki Zavadska, co-founder at Jexo, where I'm taking care of everything product related. I'm working in software for about 9 years, and I was working in roles like QA, support and customer success, and now product management and design. While working with the teams and growing the company, I quickly realized how important it is to pay close attention to potential risks you might find along the way, and how important it is to create a risk-free environment for your teams so they can be creative, stay motivated, and focus on the goals. So in this talk, we will quickly talk about what risk management is and why it is important for agile teams, how we can go about managing risks, and finally we will deep dive into the different methods, tools and techniques you can use with your team to find risks and eliminate them. But before we start, I wanted to introduce you to Jexo. Jexo is a gold Atlassian Marketplace partner that helps teams improve the way they deliver work with our Jira planning apps. We have a portfolio of planning apps, and our marketplace is covering topics like road mapping, prioritization, reporting, and risk management. So let's kickstart this session with a quick introduction to risk management, what it is. So the first thing that comes to my mind, at least, when someone says risk management, well, it's kind of like a waterfall company or a big project, bunch of people sitting in the room on a boring meeting for hours trying to figure out the project's risks. Well, definitely not something I should be worried about with my small agile team, right? But is it? When you give it a second thought, we are practicing some aspects of risk management on a daily basis. And we must be, otherwise Jexo wouldn't be able to survive and thrive in the ecosystem. We're also practicing risk management outside our jobs in our day-to-day lives when we are planning a trip, moving house, having a kid or pet. You can't be just relying on luck and intuition. You must be thinking about risks and address them throughout your whole life. So what is actually risk management? It's all about identifying, analyzing, and responding to risk factors throughout the project to make sure that your project stays on track. It's a proactive planning process that identifies risks and how to handle them. So then you can create a plan and stay focused and minimize those risks on your project. So the purpose of risk management is to identify the possible risks, reduce them, be able to explain why you're handling the risks the way you are, and plan better and more realistically. So fundamentally, what you're trying to do with risk management is to decrease the probability and consequences of the events that could get you into trouble. I guess we are all familiar with Murphy's laws that says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, but also you can extend it to anything that can go wrong will go wrong at the worst possible time. Edward Murphy was an aerospace engineer, and he was testing safety features for the US Air Force aircraft. One of the laws that he said during his work were, if an aircraft part can be installed incorrectly, someone will install it that way. But you can apply Murphy's laws on anything, including project management or working with the agile team. When planning with your team, remember that if anything that can go wrong, it will, usually at the worst possible time, and if someone can get it wrong, they will. And when you finally do a risk assessment, you might realize that if several things can go wrong, the one that you would least like to happen, it will actually occur. So let's take these examples and put them into the real life. So for example, if your product manager adds an easy fix before the end of the sprint, it will most likely become a month-long refactor. Or that one time you forget to take the database backup before deployment, you will need to revert the changes. And you can deploy changes to production from Monday to Thursday for a year with no issues, but you deploy on Friday once and production goes down. Do any of these sound familiar? Some would say that Murphy's laws are way too pessimistic way of thinking, but I would argue that they are more realistic than you think, and keeping them in mind helps you be more prepared when times comes, and same comes with risk management. So why should you care about risks and risk management in Agile? When you think of Agile, I usually think of speed too, and then this quote from Mark Zuckerberg pops into my head, which is move fast and break things. Early Agile teams are pro-progress, being as efficient and effective as possible, taking many risks, maybe sometimes not even thinking about them. But going too fast has its own risks as well, and you're likely to hit the speed bumps along the way, and sometimes even worse. Now, don't take me wrong, I do agree with Agile teams going fast and breaking things. It's a great way to innovate and experiment, but this needs to be created in a safe environment where the risks were considered upfront. By making a speedy assessment before introducing breaking changes, you save yourself a lot of trouble later on and prevent your project from failing on obvious issues that could be easily avoided. Just think about it. 90% of all risks can be eliminated or reduced through basic risk management. So why don't Agile teams talk more about managing risks? Think with the Agile teams and sprints in particular is that you're always in the rush to achieve your next milestone. And if anyone tells you that maybe you could do a bit of risk management here and there, you just think how slow and complicated process it would be, and you scratch the idea from the table. Agile teams are known to take people over processes, so making risk management feel like part of their day-to-day work and people's responsibility might be one way to go. Teams are also already juggling many different priorities, and it's really hard to add any additional work. And last but not least, many team members already think of risks or issues that could happen, but don't know where to raise them, when and to whom. And this creates a kind of like a communication silos that you need to deal with the incidents that you can easily avoid. Risks are not usually on the top of the agenda and mind when the times are good, but once something goes wrong, it's already too late and the teams get themselves into the firefighting mode. So if your teams are always working on the latest fire and are working long hours and getting stressed, they might just simply not know how to vocalize their problems, and individuals try to deal with them themselves without getting the right level of support they should. Miscommunication and not vocalizing the risks are then leading to many incidents, and sometimes even worse. It takes long time to recover from such incidents. So if done properly, risk management minimizes spending time and resources that you need to recover from the incidents and the negative effects of them. But it also minimizes the number of them. That means that your team is going to have more time to do their actual work instead of firefighting all the time. And it will contribute to their well-being, and they will be able to plan their work better throughout the day. But we all know that bringing yet another process into your team workflow will be hard, but you can incorporate the risk management into your team ceremonies or run workshops that are more engaging and feel a little bit less like work. But before we dive into these, let's have a look at a brief theory of risk management for your busy Agile teams. You can structure your risk management into the 5 steps, which are identification, analysis, prioritization, treatment, and monitoring. So during risk identification, you are aiming to identify potential risks, when they could occur, and what could trigger them. This is basically where you are going to be collecting your findings, and project managers usually call the place where you store these risk register. So identifying the risk is done in the iterations. It's not only once, and it should be done together with the team. When you identify some of your risks, you can start with risk analysis. So in this step, you need to determine what's the probability of risk happening, but also analyze what would be the impact on the business when the risk occurs. And once you are done, you can now decide based on your data what risks you should be focusing on first. So usually the bigger impact of the risk on the business, the more important it is to start with. But you should also consider the probability of the risk happening while making this decision. And that's why tools like risk matrix or risk levels or even risk score are important during your prioritization process. The next step is to respond to the risk. There are different ways you can deal with the risks. You can either eliminate the risk, acknowledge the risk without a treatment, prepare a battle plan in case the risk occurs, or any combination of these. So during this step, you should also assign the risk owner, if you didn't already, so you clearly signal who is responsible for delivering all actions regarding the risks. And last, whoever is the risk owner is responsible also for tracking progress. They will need to stay updated at all times so they can have a good idea of progress and be able to identify and monitor new risks as well. The steps of risk management that we just talked about are most effective if they're executed as an iterative process, not only once in a while. So for example, risk identification should happen on daily basis, on any of your Agile meetings, or even outside in one-to-one conversations or alone. Risk analysis and prioritization can be included in your planning meetings on weekly or bi-weekly basis and so on. So here are just a few meetings that you are likely already have with your Agile team ceremonies. So just think about it. On a daily stand-up, for example, one of the main questions is to ask if there are any blockers. This can not only be the things that team member need help with, but also risks that they want to highlight to the team. The same comes, for example, on team retrospectives, where the team shares what went well and what didn't, which can highlight many risks as well. The importance here is to encourage your team to raise those risks and issues so they don't keep them to themselves. When someone raises the risk, we shouldn't just kind of like wave it and hope it will be fine. We should take action, log the risk, and decide what to do with it. So typically you will do a risk identification during your sprint or release planning meetings when kickstarting a new project or just before releasing some breaking changes on go, no-go calls. Okay, now when we know what the risk management is and why we should care, so how do we get our teams to actually do it? No one wants to get more work on top of a lot of work they already do, right? So the key is to make it easy and incorporate risk management into already existing processes or run dedicated workshops where teams can contribute and vocalize their opinion. Not to also mention that these workshops are an effective team building tool. Risk identification might be one of the most problematic steps in the process. It's important to capture risks as they are being raised by your team on different meetings or while they work on something and the idea pops into their head and so on. And that's where the risk registers come into play. A risk register is basically a tool that you can use to track and monitor any risks that might impact your project and goal. So think of it as a backlog, but for your risks. Risk register is kind of like a centralized place where you log the risks as they are being raised, but this doesn't need to be done only by the manager. Everyone in the team should be encouraged to raise the risks as they go. In Jira, you can create a new project or board dedicated to managing and logging your risks. You can also create a custom issue type called risk or opportunity that you can then use for this. And if you would like to make it easier to raise risks for your team, you can create a form that they can submit without accessing Jira. You can either use Jira Work Management to create these forms or alternatively Jira Service Management. Anytime someone identifies something that could impact your project, it should be then recorded in your risk register. So make sure you also collect the right information up front. So for example, what's the type of the risk? Does it have an effect on the team? Or is it a business risk, product risk, and so on? You can use Jira custom fields to collect any additional information that you need. Having a risk register to log your risk is the best first step you can do towards better risk management. However, you might find out that it's hard to get the risks logged in. You can set a different workshops with your team before starting a new project or bigger piece of work to motivate the team to raise those risks. I have here a collection of 4 workshops you can run with your team that are focused on the risk identification. So we are all familiar with postmortem, which usually comes after you have some incident. But imagine doing something called pre-mortem, which is kind of like a workshop that you would run before your project starts, so you can actually avoid the incidents and problems. So I found this pre-mortem play on the Atlassian Team Plays and found that it's a really great way to start any project. It helps you identify the risks, resources, and get everyone on the same page. So first you need to get a whiteboard and sticky notes, or you can use any whiteboard apps like whiteboards.io or Miro and use this template to draw the sections. Give the team 10 minutes to silently write answers for each question on the board. And you can also set the scene by asking to focus on what could go wrong and what could go right in the project. Next, the team should go through the answers and group similar answers together. And then give each team member 3 votes so they can vote on the cards they think are key to the project's success. And once that's done, give each team member another 3 votes and let them vote on the cards that they think they are representing the biggest threats or risks to the project. And then move the 3 topics with the most votes to discuss section. Now set the timer for 10 minutes and discuss with the team what are the biggest risks for the 3 most voted cards and how you could mitigate those risks. This exercise is really great to get everyone aligned on what's the biggest risk of your project, but you can also get an overview of additional risks that you might focus on after the meeting. The next one is Hopes and Fears workshop, which is a great way to create kind of like a safe space for your team to share their feelings towards the project or some important change that might be coming. It will help to get you a sense of a team mood and identify any risks and opportunities as well. The workshop board is quite simple. It just consists of 2 columns, one for hopes and one for fears. And you can assign and use any physical or digital whiteboard to do this exercise. Give the team 10 minutes to write down their hopes and fears on the sticky notes and place them on the board. And after everyone is done, go through the sticky notes and see if there are any repeating patterns or themes. See if there is any sensitive topics that worth bringing up for discussion now or schedule individual sessions later. The workshop isn't about addressing those hopes and fears immediately. It's more about identifying the risks and opportunities so you can work with them later. So this one is basically a Find Friends and Foes workshop. This one is great because you're basically focusing very deeply on identifying risks and opportunities for 12 different sections of your projects that you can of course also adjust. So there are examples like size and scope, tools and methods, organization, work management, and so on. So the way this works is in the first part of the session, you are kind of playing a karma date. So what could go well in the project, and you give each team member 1 minute or 2 minutes per each section, and they just write as many ideas as they can. And then you just repeat the same for the doomsday, but you are just thinking of what could go wrong. So this workshop is really great to identify as many risks and opportunities as possible and get the ideas flowing so you can then take an action and log those in your risk register. And the last exercise for the risk identification is a SWOT analysis. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's basically a framework that is used to evaluate a company's competitive position and to develop a strategic planning, but it can also be used by the teams to help with planning the work and the projects. So you can run the workshop with your team the same way you usually run your retrospectives, or if your team is getting bored of the retrospectives format, which switch to the SWOT analysis for once, and you might be surprised by the results. The next step in your risk management process is risk analysis. So when you collected your risks, it's time to have a closer look at them. Risk analysis typically involves analyzing risks and assessing their probability and impact. So when assessing probability, you're looking at how likely it is for the risk to occur. So sometimes you can also refer to this as a likelihood. You can either assign a low, medium, and high options, or you can think in the percentages. So for example, the probability of the risk occurring is 30%. The impact, on the other hand, represents the impact on your project or the business, and some also call it consequence. So again, you can assign either labels, which are high, medium, or low, or you can think it as in a financial impact of the risk, and you can also assign the dollar value instead. So in Jira, you can either use custom fields to assign risk probability and impact values to your risks, or even better, you can use a risk management app like Hedge, where you can analyze and assign probability and impact of your risks directly in your risk register. The next step is prioritization. So after you collect and analyze your risks, you need to find out which ones you should be focusing on. So ideally, I would try to eliminate all risks, but it's likely that you won't have enough time and resources to focus on all of them at once. And that's why it's important to prioritize them so you can focus on the most important ones first. So you can use risk levels and risk matrix to decide on the priority of the risk, but you can also calculate the risk score. Risk matrix is basically a two-dimensional chart where on x-axis you can plot an impact and on y-axis the probability. And then you add the issues on the risk matrix based on the assessment of the impact and the probability you've done while analyzing your risks. The risk matrix also creates this kind of like a heat map with areas of high impact and high probability, or low impact and low probability, and so on. And you can segment these heat map and assign the level of risk to each area. So the level of risks can be, for example, certain, major, minor, or low risk. And based on this, then you know exactly what's the risk level for each raised risk. You can also calculate a risk score when you multiply values of impact and probability. So this helps with prioritizing the risks if you have a longer risk register and the risk levels aren't enough anymore. So in general, you should focus on the risks with the highest risk level or the risk score first before progressing to the lower level risk issues. When you are managing your risks in Jira, you can use Hedge app to set up your risk matrix, risk levels, and risk score. The risk matrix, levels, and even the score are completely customizable, so you can edit the settings to your own needs. And when you're going to be assessing impact and probability for each risk, the risk score and levels will be automatically assigned. You can also have a look in the reports to check out the matrix itself and drill down to the issues in each segment. Next, there is a risk treatment. So after you analyze and prioritize your risks, you need to decide how you are going to deal with these risks. How are you going to treat them? So to simplify this process, you can use TAME framework. TAME stands for Transfer, Accept, Mitigate, and Eliminate. This framework introduces 4 ways you can deal with the risks. Transfer the risk, which means that you move it to the third party. You can also accept the risk, and so with this option, it's sometimes also referred to as do nothing. It basically means that you are going to acknowledge the risk and deal with it if and when it occurs. The third one is mitigate the risk. So when mitigating the risk, you're implementing the strategies or the solutions to reduce its probability or impact, or both. And the last is eliminate risk. So you're doing everything you can to prevent risk from occurring. And depending on what is your team's and organization risk appetite, you can decide on how you're going to deal with risks in different risk levels and priorities. So in Jira, you can create a custom field called treatment with a drop-down with 10 treatment options. And then for each risk, you can decide what the treatment should be. Important step is also assign a risk assignee, so you know who is responsible for the risk. For the risks that require some actions, you can raise those tasks in Jira and then track progress of your mitigation tasks. And the next comes risk monitoring. So you need to monitor your risk progress on the mitigation plan and risk statuses. There are plenty of different metrics you can track, so let's have a look at a few. So I will show you what kind of reports for your risk monitoring you can find in Hatch. Hatch has its own dedicated reports section where you can find risk matrix. So on the risk matrix, you can control what risks are in which risk level and use filters on the top for example, filter all risks that are assigned to you or with a certain status and so on. Then there is also this pie chart visualizing the percentage of the issues in the risk level. This one is great if you need to quickly pull out the high-level stats about your risk register just before the meeting. The next one is a bar chart showing a risk level per status category, which is great for progress tracking. And the last one is a line chart where you can see how the risks are being raised over time. So typically in the healthy teams, you would see the risks being raised during the whole project and likely with a spike in the beginning of the project. If you see that all risks are raised only during 1 or 2 days, it's likely that your team is not raising potential risks and you might want to encourage them or run some workshop or retrospective. You can also use Kanban board in Jira to create a workflow for your risks and track their progress on the board. So because risks are Jira issues, you can store all kind of information in the description, comment on those risks or link them to the related issues. And if you're implementing a risk mitigation plans or any documentation, you can store this info in Confluence and link Confluence pages to Jira issues so you have all information in one place. And that's it. We went through all steps of risk management together and learned how to apply them all in Jira with the help of risk management app Hatch. When it comes to Agile risk management, it's important to iterate through the process multiple times during the project in bi-weekly or monthly cycles, or even more often. It helps you identify the risks you would otherwise miss if you would do risk assessment only once in the beginning of your project. So I hope that you did enjoy this presentation. Before you go, I prepared this worksheet for you where you can find all risks identification workshops I talked about in this presentation together with the examples and steps on how you can run the workshops. So just go to this URL and download it for free. So if you would like to chat more about risk management, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you would like to give Hatch a try and improve your risk management process, have a look at our marketplace where you can learn more about Hatch and